the structures within the system. We will examine our blood and its components, and we will conclude with information pertaining to the functions of the circulatory system. The best place to start when examining the circulatory system is the heart. When discussing the anatomy of the heart, we begin by dividing the heart into a right and left side. Because the heart sits at a slight angle within the body, the line we drew is not completely vertical. Each side of the heart has two chambers. The superior chamber on each side is called the atrium. We differentiate between the two by the side on which each respective atrium sits. Thus, we have a right atrium as well as a left atrium. The inferior chambers of the heart are the ventricles. As before, we differentiate between the two by referring to the right and left sides, resulting in a right ventricle and a left ventricle. These chambers within the heart are separated by a series of valves that prevent blood from flowing backward. The tricuspid valve lies between the right atrium and the right ventricle. The pulmonary valve is between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery, which we will identify in just a bit. On the left side of the heart, the left atrium and left ventricle are separated by the mitral valve. The aortic valve then lies between the left ventricle and the aorta, which we will be identifying soon as well. Essentially, deoxygenated blood enters the heart from the rest of the body through the right atrium. From the right atrium, the blood moves into the right ventricle, where it is pumped out through the pulmonary arteries to the lungs. Oxygenated blood returns from the lungs through the pulmonary veins into the left atrium. From the left atrium, blood enters the main pumping chamber of the heart, the left ventricle, where the blood is then pumped out to the rest of the body. Now, do not worry if that description went a little fast. We'll be discussing the functioning of the heart and its chambers in much greater depth in a different module of this course. The heart also has an electrical system with which the EMT must be familiar. The heart's electrical system will be a topic of discussion in another module as well. For the time being, just know that the heart has four chambers: the right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, and left ventricle. When we discussed muscles before, it was
said that the heart is such an important muscle that it has its own blood supply. While the heart itself is filled with blood, the blood within the heart does not supply the muscle of the heart with oxygen. Rather, the heart receives its supply of oxygen through the coronary arteries. The red arteries on this computer model are the coronary arteries. These arteries branch off from the aorta to provide the heart with fresh, oxygenated blood. They are labeled right and left based upon the side of the heart to which they supply blood. When someone has a heart attack, it is commonly due to a blockage in the coronary artery, which reduces or stops the flow of blood and, as a result, oxygen distal to the blockage. By definition, arteries are the vessels that take blood away from the heart. There are two main arteries that leave the heart. The first is the pulmonary artery, which takes oxygen-depleted blood from the right ventricle to the lungs. Because blood returns to the heart from the body through the right atrium into the right ventricle and then through the pulmonary artery before going to the lungs to exchange carbon dioxide for oxygen, the pulmonary artery is the only artery in the body that carries oxygen-depleted blood. The other main artery leaving the heart also happens to be the largest artery in the body. It is the aorta. Once blood is oxygenated in the lungs, it returns to the heart through the left atrium, into the left ventricle, and then into the aorta for distribution throughout the body. The aorta extends superior to the heart, providing blood to the coronary arteries and the head before traveling inferiorly to provide blood to the rest of the body. Beyond the aorta lie the remaining arteries. The anatomical locations of the main arteries are important to know, as these are locations in which the EMT will check for a patient's pulse. The carotid arteries, one on each side of the neck, left and right, supply blood to the head and its organs. They are located on the neck, inferior to the jaw, lateral to the thorax. The brachial artery is located in each arm, on the anterior crease of the elbow, along the medial aspect of the upper arm. This artery is commonly used for a pulse check on infants, and it is also the location for stethoscope placement when taking a blood pressure. The radial artery is located on the anterior side of each wrist, proximal from the thumb. The radial artery is adjacent to the radius in the lower arm, thus its name. It is very common for EMS providers to obtain a patient's pulse by palpating the radial artery in either the patient's left or right wrist. There are two femoral arteries, one for both the left and right legs. These arteries can be palpated in the crease between the abdomen and the groin. Proceeding down the lower extremities, there are two other pulse locations commonly used by EMS providers. The first is the posterior tibial artery, which is on the posterior aspect of the medial malleus. Stated another way, it's on the inside of the ankle toward the heel. The second is the dorsalis pedis artery, which is on the dorsal part of the foot, the top, lateral to the large tendon of the big toe. These arteries exist in both the right and left leg, and they are commonly palpated to confirm circulation to the lower extremities. As the arteries extend from the heart, they narrow in size. Eventually, we reach the smallest branch of an artery, called an arteriole. These small vessels then lead to capillaries. When we discussed respiration and perfusion associated with the respiratory system, capillaries were an important component. The pulmonary capillaries are where the circulatory system meets the respiratory system. It is through these capillaries that gases are exchanged between the air in our lungs and our bloodstream. The other capillaries in our body, not associated with the lungs and alveoli, perform a similar function with the other cells in our body, exchanging gases, nutrients, and waste products between the circulatory system and those cells. To accomplish this exchange, capillaries are very small, the width of a single blood cell. With that gaseous exchange completed with the cells of our body, the blood then enters the venous system, the entry point for which is the venule, the smallest part of the vein that connects the capillaries to the rest of the venous system. The network of veins throughout the human body is very similar to the network of arteries. If the arteries carry blood away from the heart, something has to carry it back. Thus, wherever arteries go, the veins must go as well. The veins close the proverbial loop of the circulatory system. The veins return blood from the extremities, torso, and head to the heart. When someone initiates an IV, intravenous therapy, they are accessing the circulatory system through the venous, not arterial, blood supply. Ultimately, blood returns to the heart from the venous system through the vena cava. There is both a superior vena cava, which returns blood from the head and upper body, and an inferior vena cava, which returns blood from the lower body and extremities. The blood from the vena cava enters the right atrium, where the blood begins its journey through the circulatory system once again. Once the blood is infused with oxygen in the lungs, it returns to the heart through the pulmonary veins. Because the pulmonary veins return to the heart from the lungs, they are the only veins in the body that carry oxygenated blood. All the other veins return to the heart with a depleted oxygen supply. When looking at illustrations of the circulatory system, arteries are typically drawn as red because the blood they carry are oxygen rich,